Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour parler un peu du supplément de revenu garanti. Ça fait déjà des mois que les aînés qui dépendent sur le supplément de revenu garanti ne le reçoivent pas parce qu'il y a un an, ces aînés travaillaient, ou plus qu'un an au début de la pandémie, ces aînés travaillaient. Puis quand ils ont perdu leur emploi pendant la pandémie, le gouvernement leur a dit de faire application pour le PCU. Ils l'ont reçu et maintenant le gouvernement reprend ces argents-là par le mécanisme de réduire leurs prestations de supplément de revenus garantis. Il y a des aînés qui perdent leur maison. On sait d'un aîné qui fait juste savoir qu'il a le cancer. Il est en menace d'éviction le 23 décembre et il n'a pas assez d'argent pour payer ses loyers et pour payer pour ses médicaments de cancer. Et c'est pour ça que c'est urgent que le gouvernement trouve une solution. Ils ont su en mai au moins de cette année que ce serait un problème, puis ils n'ont pas décidé de poursuivre une solution dans une manière proactive. Ils ont attendu jusqu'à ce que les aînés ont déjà perdu leurs revenus et qu'ils étaient en crise. Et ça fait déjà des mois qu'ils sont en crise. Moi, j'ai écrit le gouvernement au début du mois d'août et ils ont toujours rien fait. On a eu une élection, ils n'ont rien fait. On est ici de retour après 3 semaines de Parlement, puis après 6 ou plus semaines depuis l'élection. Jagmeet a soulevé cet enjeu dans sa première réunion avec le premier ministre. Il le soulève encore aujourd'hui dans une lettre au premier ministre. Et nous voulons que le gouvernement sache et comprend le niveau d'urgence pour trouver une solution. Et ça doit être une solution qui fait en sorte que les personnes qui sont en crise en ce moment-ci n'ont pas besoin de faire demande, n'ont pas besoin de naviguer un système gouvernemental difficile parce qu'il y a une femme. Par exemple, on a entendu au comité des finances cette semaine ou la semaine passée, qui vit dans son auto parce qu'elle a déjà perdu sa maison. Et pour elle, de faire demande à une application, peut-être en ligne ou quelque chose de même, quand elle vit dans son auto, n'est pas une solution réaliste, ce n'est pas une solution qui va bien fonctionner pour aider aux gens qui maintenant, à cause du manque d'urgence du gouvernement, se trouvent en crise. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming today. We're here to talk about the Guaranteed Income Supplement and all of the seniors that have been in crisis for months now because the government has refused to act with the appropriate sense of urgency. And when I talk about urgency, what I mean is an example from our colleague Alistair McGregor's riding of a man who was just diagnosed with cancer, who has had his guaranteed income supplement significantly reduced, is now at the point where he's been told he is going to be evicted just 2 days before Christmas on December 23rd. He can't afford his rent and he can't afford his cancer medication. He can't afford those things because he had the audacity to work to supplement his guaranteed income supplement, which doesn't put seniors at or above the poverty line, but keeps them in poverty. And when he lost his job in the pandemic, like so many other Canadians, he was told to get help, to apply for the CERB, and he did that. And he received the CERB. Nobody, when he received it, told him that they would be taking it back out of his normal budget under the guaranteed income supplement the next year. They didn't say, put aside some money. This is just an advance on your normal benefits. We're taking it back later. They said, get help because you need it, and don't worry, you won't be persecuted, you won't be punished. So he took the government at their word, and he is suffering for that now. This is an issue the government has known about for a long time. They've known about it since at least May of this year. And they haven't done anything about it. They didn't do anything about it when we raised it in a letter at the beginning of August. They didn't do anything about it when it came up during the election. Jagmeet raised it with the Prime Minister in his first meeting with Justin Trudeau after the election. The Prime Minister took his time calling Parliament back. We've been back for 3 weeks. They still haven't done anything. Jagmeet is writing the Prime Minister again today to call for swift action. And it's important to understand when we talk about folks like the gentleman I mentioned earlier, that swift action is a product of the crisis that these seniors are facing because they haven't had enough revenue to make rent or to buy food or to buy medication for a long time now. And it's important to understand that a proper solution to this problem doesn't mean having a convoluted bureaucratic system that seniors have to apply for while they're living out of their car. We heard at the Finance Committee last week about a woman in the Northwest Territories who's already been evicted from her home and is living out of her car. Well, telling her that there's a great solution where she can do a bunch of paperwork or fill out an online application is not going to be an adequate solution for her. And it's not going to be an adequate solution for many of the seniors who are facing this crisis and haven't gone to their MP, or maybe don't know that there'll be a solution because they're trying to figure out where they're going to get their next meal. What we need is for the government to review these files and be in touch with affected seniors with a solution that makes them whole on their GIS benefit, that isn't just a kind of partial payment, that isn't going to get them back in their apartments in cases where now they may have already lost their last month's rent and they're going to have to find it if they sign a new lease. So we need the government to finally adopt the sense of urgency that they should have had going all the way back to May when they first saw that this was going to be a problem, and to talk a little bit more about that sense of urgency and how this issue has had a real impact on seniors. I want to invite my colleague, Rachel Blaney, to the podium.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today to address this urgent crisis that is facing seniors across Canada. The reality is that this government made a decision, a thoughtless decision, which has really resulted in punishing the most vulnerable seniors across Canada. Many Canadians don't know that if you are a senior receiving GIS and you are single, it means that they are bumping you up to just over $19,000 of income a year. And if you are in a relationship, a couple, just over $25,000. Can you imagine waking up every day and knowing that is all you have? So when you think about that, some seniors are losing as much as $1,000 a month. How do you live in this country on just over $12,000 a year? It is impossible. So we're hearing from seniors across the country. What they're telling us is simply this: please help. We took this money because we were working seniors. And I want to remind Canadians that all other services were removed. The CERB and the CRB were the only thing that you could apply for. So seniors did it. They were working seniors. They lost their income, their jobs because of the pandemic. They applied like every other Canadian. And I also want to point out that what seniors did with that little extra amount of money was important things like finally get caught up on their bills, pay for dental work, fix a car so that they could keep looking for work. Seniors across this country who are the poorest seniors work to help make ends meet every single day. They know how much they can make every year, and they're mindful of that when they apply for opportunities. I just want to point out again, this was the only thing that they could do to make sure they didn't lose their homes. And as a result, this government is punishing them, and that is what is happening. We have seniors who cannot afford medication, who are getting unhealthy in and out of hospitals because they simply can't make ends meet. We have seniors who are living, like Daniel said, in their vehicle, living in somebody's backyard, I've heard. These stories should not be happening. And when the government keeps saying to all of us and to those seniors that they were working hard on the right solution, I don't know where that fits in with people becoming homeless, with people not being able to afford their medication. Just imagine being a senior, being an elderly person, having fragile health, fighting cancer, and you can't afford that medication. So I think that the government isn't listening very well because these are seniors that are making life and death choices every single day across this country. For no other reason than this government didn't listen when we brought this forward and said, you may want to look at these things. These could be big issues if you don't think about them. And when we came forward, when we started to hear from seniors back in August, here's what is happening. Let's look at a solution that makes sense. So where is the right answer? How many seniors have to get sick? How many seniors have to die? How many seniors can't afford their medication and have to be living on the streets before this government will step up for the most vulnerable among us? So I want to thank the brave seniors. There's been several seniors from my riding who have stepped up that have told their stories. And I also want to point out how afraid they are to tell these stories because they're scared they're going to be punished even further by this government by taking the risk and being vulnerable. You know, right now in one of my offices, we have a senior who's made several threats of self-harm. And we work with her every day to make sure that that doesn't happen. We should not live in a country where the most vulnerable of us, are the poorest of us, are punished in such a way by something that they can solve, but they choose not to solve. So hopefully we hear soon what the right solution is, but I'm just wondering how many seniors have to go homeless before we hear that solution. Thank you.
We'll now go to questions. Questions on the phone. One question, one follow-up per reporter. Nous allons aux questions. Maintenant, les questions au téléphone. Une question suivie par journaliste. Opérateur, avons-nous une première question?
Nous n'avons pas de questions. There are no questions at this time.
Maybe.
Yes, oui.
Oui, parfait.
Yes. Oui, nous avons une question. Donc, la première question est de Tom Korski, Blacklock Reporters. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Blaikie. I want to ask you, Chief Actuary says there's about 2 million seniors get the GIS. So the overwhelming majority of them presumably would also need car repairs or could use a trip to the dentist, but they follow the rules. Isn't that the stumbling block in any accommodation or amnesty, that the large majority, almost all of the 2 million GIS recipients who follow the rules would be punished if they do not get the same treatment in not claiming benefits as the clients that you refer to?
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to clear up what I think is a misunderstanding out there. These seniors followed the rules. Nobody broke the rules. These seniors were eligible for the CERB. They worked. They made $5,000 of employment income in the year prior to the pandemic and met all the other criteria for the CERB. So they applied to replace this employment income. It wasn't their choice that the payment was inflexible. The government decided to have an inflexible program. And, you know, there were some reasons why in terms of trying to roll it out quickly and things of that nature, but nobody broke any of the program rules. So I don't think there is a question of equity or fairness here in the sense that we're talking about seniors that met the criteria for CERB, were paid CERB, and are now seeing those CERB payments clawed back through their GIS. If only some of the largest corporations had some kind of, you know, regular payment from government we could claw it back from, but they don't. So they get to walk away with tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And it's simply because these seniors were already so vulnerable that they depended on a certain kind of government assistance that the government has the ability to claw this back from them, despite the fact that just like those big corporations who didn't break any rules because the rules weren't written to avoid that kind of abuse, you know, except that they're not being asked for any money back. So it's wrong to say that the folks we're talking about here, who represent about 88,000 of the seniors who are on GIS, broke the rules, because they didn't. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. And I know there have been some questions about the finances of this, so there's just a couple of points about the finances that I'd like to make. The first point is that this is money that's already in the budget. There's a statute that lays out the spending for the guaranteed income supplement. This is not, you know, stopping this clawback is not an extraordinary expenditure. It just represents what the government would have spent on the guaranteed income supplement program had there not been a pandemic. The extraordinary spending was the pandemic benefit. Government made program choices about that. They failed to tell people what the consequences down the line of the government's choices would be for their guaranteed income supplement. And that money is out the door. And as Rachel rightly pointed out, it was spent on things like dental work, squaring up on old bills, doing car repairs, things of that nature, things that had to be done, and that represented a nice little break for some of our most vulnerable seniors who don't get a lot of financial breaks. The Ottawa Golf Club here got a break. They're repaving their parking lot 3 years early because of the windfall that they got from the wage subsidy. I don't see any outrage about that. Let's see an article, more articles about what companies are doing with the wage subsidy money. The second point that I think is important to make is that in the city of Winnipeg about 5 years ago, we've talked a lot about inflation, so I'm sure this cost is higher now. For each person who is homeless, it costs taxpayers about $150 a day. That works out to over $55,000 a year. In many cases with these seniors, we're talking about $5,000 or $6,000 a year that will make all the difference to them. It will keep them housed, and it will avoid those extraordinary costs to taxpayers that come through the health system and in all the other many ways that poverty costs all of us. And so from a dollars and cents point of view, this is an investment that was already in the budget that will avoid a lot of other significant high costs.
I wanted to ask Mr. Blaikie on C3, you're on the Commons Finance Committee. Obviously, you're going through that bill that amends the Canada Labour Code. Speaking of which, the Liberal Party in its campaign platform 3 months ago proposed a restriction on hiring of replacement workers in federally regulated industries. And your party produced that in private bills for 15 years. I don't see an amendment from your caucus to Bill C3 while Cabinet goes about amending the Canada Labour Code. Will you make that amendment?
Well, C2 is the bill that's currently being studied by the Finance Committee. C3 is being studied by another committee, and I would encourage you to be in touch with my colleague Alexandre Boularis, who's our labor critic and has been our lead on that bill. So in terms of specific legislative details about the bill, Alex would be the person to direct your questions to.
Thank you very much.
Next question.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Mary Brooke of Island Social Trends. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Sorry, there was a code problem dialing in, so I may have missed the answer to this already. But is this a deal breaker for the NDP? Will your party not support C2 if the GIS and the child benefit, for that matter, are not restored before Christmas and not included in the legislation?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And that is something that we've been very clear about. The most vulnerable of us should not be paying the bill for this pandemic. The reality, and I think Daniel has outlined it very clearly, is a lot of large corporations have received significant amounts of money. They've paid out big shareholder expenses, and nobody's asking them to pay that back to the government. So we are standing strong. We've been fighting for this in the House, and that is for us something that is a deal breaker.
Okay. And the payout of just about anything during the pandemic is an overall problem now. You've pointed out that the most vulnerable are, carrying the weight of this, but major companies are not. Has there been an overall question to the government about basically their entire strategy toward pandemic benefits and the underlying almost prejudice, if you will, against the underserved in our society?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think our leader, Jagmeet Singh, has been very clear on this again and again. He's asked in the House repeatedly, last Parliament and in this Parliament, when will the Liberals make their decision clear about who they're going to make pay. And they are making it clear. They're making it clear in their actions. And so what we're seeing across this country is the most vulnerable people paying the cost, while the most wealthy of us are experiencing the best year that they've had in the last 10 years. These are important questions. You know, we are asking this government to be responsible to Canadians and make sure that the wealthiest of us pay for this pandemic, that we don't ask the most vulnerable to lose their basic sustainability, having a home, having enough money to feed themselves, but asking people who have a lot extra to make sure that they're a key part of this. And the Liberals consistently are not taking those actions. So we'll continue to push them. We know that Canadians believe that that is the right thing to do, and we'll continue to voice that and encourage Canadians to let this Prime Minister know. If you're going to do the right thing, now is the time to show us.
Next question.
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Laurie Wolf of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, it's actually Mari Wolf. Can I ask about a different matter, if I may? It's about the apology to members of the armed forces who suffered sexual abuse. We're expecting an apology today from the Defence Minister, and I wondered if you thought that went far enough or whether you thought further measures were needed. And can I ask a question which is related to what you're saying about the elderly and seniors? Many of the ways to navigate the system, including for vaccination passports, travelling, involve using an iPhone and technology. But a lot of elderly people simply don't have iPhones or don't even have access to the internet, and they don't want to have to navigate this in order to just go about day-to-day lives. And I just wondered if you thought the government should make some accommodation for people for whom technology is not easy, or they simply can't afford it. And I'd be grateful for your to know what you think about that.
Well, I'll answer that question first. I absolutely agree. The reality is, if you're making just over $19,000 a year, you're not going to have enough money to have a cell phone and be able to access that. And we hear from people who are older all the time that they're frustrated by the fact that they're being asked to use so much technology. You know, I remember speaking with one senior who was told to go to the public library and do her taxes online. First of all, she would need somebody to guide her through that. But the other part that was really important is she didn't want her private information on a screen in front of everyone at a public library. So this is concerning. As we transition to a more technical world, we need to make sure that those of us who can't afford or don't have the ability or knowledge have access to that. So this is concerning. And I think it really outlines what Daniel talked about earlier, which is the fact that asking seniors to do a whole bunch of work when they are just trying to get enough money to survive on, when they're living out of their car, is not acceptable. We need a solution for the GIS that's going to be effective, quick, and really let seniors off the hook, because they've been towing this line for a hard and long 6 months. As for the other question, you know, we do have a critic who's more than willing to talk about that, and we'll see what the substance is of that apology. But we've been very clear from the very beginning. There are very good reports out there that say the next steps that need to take, and it is absolutely astonishing that this government isn't taking leadership and implementing those recommendations. How many more studies do we need? How many more stories do we need to hear of what's happening within the military structure? You know, I represent a base in my riding, and I deeply appreciate those folks. You know, they were some of the folks that were out there during these storms in this time, saving people's lives. And if they weren't there being able to do that work, so many would have been harmed. So we need to make that environment a safer environment. We know that women in the military are still underrepresented. And until we get those processes in place where it is clear and transparent and does not continue to silence those voices, we're not going to see more women participating. So I think everybody in Canada, including the military, want to see action on this. And again, how many reports do we need? So the apology, when it comes, is one thing, but what we really need to see is the action on the other side. And when I think about this government, that is one of the most astonishing realities, is we hear a lot of good things, but we don't see the actions to follow them up.
Next question.
Thank you, merci. And we have, unfortunately, no more questions on the telephone lines.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.